Yo, what up everybody? It's me, Fitness65. Now, I've been trying to upload this video, but my camera keeps freezing, and every time I make another video, it just keeps stopping and pausing. So hopefully this video is able to get through and I get this video out like the way I wanted it to get out. But today, like I said, I'm back from being gone for about a week or so, or a week or 2.5 weeks. Kind of wanted to take a break, but I'm back and I'm bringing my Wrestling Forgotten Gems series back. Now, I know I haven't made those videos. The last video I made of that in a while. The last video I made about that was a Chris Benoit, Chris Jericho feud, which was requested, but I decided to bring it back today since I'm back making another video. Thought I'd bring my Wrestling Forgotten Gems back, and since it's May and the Wrestling Forgotten Gems video is going to be on this particular person, and it's sort of the anniversary of this particular person's death, who is Owen Hart. I thought I'd do the video on him, sort of, or Wrestling Forgotten Gems on him. So let's get started with this video. Now, Owen Hart was a very good wrestler, very hard worker. He always put a lot of energy in his matches. You never got less from Owen Hart. He was a good high flyer, very good technical wrestler. He just had it all, and in my personal opinion, and I know most people are probably gonna hate me on this, but I thought he was a way better wrestler than his brother Bret. I mean, the guy was a complete package. He was a very good he was more of a technical wrestler. He was a better technical wrestler than his brother Bret. He was a better high flyer than his brother Bret, and he actually was better at cutting promos than his brother Bret. So Owen Hart pretty much had the complete total package and just exactly what you would want in a wrestler, and that's why I feel he was better than his brother Bret, and I feel he was a very good wrestler, and most people shouldn't forget about this guy, even though there are some people that remember him, but there's a few people who just forget about him from time to time, and they think about other wrestlers in the 90s, but they don't mention this guy. To me, this guy's a future Hall of Famer. I mean, the guy should already be in the Hall of Fame, but due to certain circumstances, he probably won't ever get in the Hall of Fame, and many of you who read about that or heard stories about that know what I'm talking about, so you don't need me kind of explaining what happened. But I just wish this guy would get in the Hall of Fame and get the recognition that the guy deserves, because the guy was just a good worker. He put on good matches. He was very entertaining. He was a very good heel. He was a very good face, and the guy just loved the wrestling business, despite the fact that the wrestling business wasn't the thing that he wanted to get into. He kind of wanted to be a fire. He wanted to be a fire. If you watched the Bret Hart DVD, then you know that he originally wanted to be a firefighter, and wrestling wasn't the thing he wanted to get into, because he just didn't think wrestling was his thing. He kind of wanted to be a firefighter, and that was his dream job, but he wasn't able to accomplish that because of his death. And he somehow was convinced by his brother and his dad and some of his other brothers to get in the wrestling business, and he eventually got in, and thus his wrestling career sort of took off. Owen Hart started working the Canadian Stampede. Well, he started getting into training for wrestling by wrestling in his father's dungeon, the Stu Hart dungeon. For some of you who probably don't remember, that was home to some of the most famous wrestlers who ever came out of that dungeon: Chris Benoit, Chris Jericho, Bret Hart, Dynamite Kid, the British Bulldog. There was a lot of wrestlers who I can't really name, but those are the wrestlers that kind of come to my head that sort of trained in that Stu Hart dungeon, and they became better wrestlers for wrestling in that dungeon. And Owen Hart was one of those wrestlers that came out, and he became a better wrestler. He started working in Japan and having some matches there with Chris Benoit and many other guys in Japan. And he was put on some pretty damn good Japan wrestling matches. And for some of you who haven't seen his Japan work, go check out some of his matches in Japan, and you'll know what I'm talking about. I was able to catch some of his work in Japan, and he was a pretty good worker in some of his matches that he had in Japan. He also was working in the Canadian Stampede, which I just said a few minutes ago, where he was tag teaming with his brother Bret and having a singles career as well. and he was doing pretty good for himself. He also wrestled a couple other indie promotions before finally heading into the WWF, where he was wrestling under the gimmick. He was wrestling under the mask as the Blue Blazer. His first stint in the WWF, he was the Blue Blazer. He was sort of like a jobber, but he was a very good jobber. He was putting on some very good matches with Ted DiBiase. He was having good matches with Mr. Perfect. He also had that one good match with Mr. Perfect at WrestleMania 5, which I thought was one of the most underrated matches in WrestleMania history, and probably one of the sleeper matches in WrestleMania history, as this was a very good matchup. It was high flying, very good technical wrestling, some chain wrestling, some high flying wrestling in this matchup. It was just a very good matchup, and one of those matches that was just a rarity those days, where you really didn't see wrestling matches like that, but somehow you got it, and what you got was a very good matchup between two future Hall of Famers. He also had matches with Ted DiBiase, and he was just putting on some very good matches as the Blue Blazer. And I thought he should have got his upcomings when he was the Blue Blazer, but he didn't. He sort of didn't get recognized, and thus his run as the Blue Blazer just didn't really get recognized that much, and he didn't get enough credit for his run as the Blue Blazer. Then after that, he sort of worked a couple indies after leaving the WWF, and then he sort of returned to be a part of a tag team wrestler, as he teamed with Coco Beware and was a part of High Energy. Again, they were sort of a jobber tag team, as they were losing to some of the big tag teams at the time, like Money Inc. and many of the other big tag teams, and he really didn't do much, as he was just used as enhancement talent. Then he would team with his brother-in-law, Jim the Anvil Neidhart, where they would form the New Hart Foundation, sort of almost reminiscent of the old Hart Foundation with Bret Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. Again, they were sort of a jobber tag team, jobbing to some of the tag team, the big-name tag teams back in the 90s, but they were still a pretty good damn team, and they were putting on some very good matches, but they just didn't get their upcomings. And then finally, he sort of broke away from the tag team and sort of became a singles wrestler. He had some matches with Yokozuna and other wrestlers under the Owen Hart, before he became big as Owen Hart. He then became a part of one of the biggest wrestling feuds in wrestling history, or wrestling storylines of wrestling history, with his brother Bret, where Bret Hart and Owen Hart began feuding throughout that most part in 1994. Well, the feud sort of started at the Survivor Series 1993, and it just went on throughout the most part of 1994 and 1995 before quietly ending, and sort of ending throughout the part of 1995. I thought this was a very good feud. It's probably one of the best feuds that is really hard to top, as the WWE is now trying to recreate feuds like that, but you just can't top feuds like that. He ended up getting a victory over his brother, which sort of cemented his status as a main eventer and one of the best, and many people started taking notice of him. He won the King of the Ring in 1994 and had an awesome showing, put on a fantastic match against the 1-2-3 Kid, had a decent match against Razor Ramon, and an okay match against Tatanka, and he proved to the WWF that he was the future, and he was a very good wrestler and deserved to be on top. And they started pushing him as one of the best they started pushing him as a heel throughout that most part of 94 and throughout that most part of 95. And he was just a very good heel. And then he had that feud with Stone Cold Steve Austin, where he broke Stone Cold Steve Austin's neck, and then they sort of played off that, and the two had matches against each other that just weren't that good, but the feud for what it was pretty good. He also had that feud with DX, and then he joined the Nation, and they feuded, and then he sort of joined with Jeff Jarrett, and they had that tag team before they ended that tag team, and they had him go as the Blue Blazer. And there was rumors that he was going to be taking Triple H's spot and sort of get a big push, but that didn't end up happening, as he ended up dying at Over the Edge in 1999. But Owen Hart was a very good wrestler, good high flyer. I wish many people would remember him for some of the things he did and some of the matches he put on, but